Hi, this is international psychic medium Susan Schueler. Welcome to my show, MidLife Conversations. I decided to start a show like this because I noticed there were many people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s who shared similar situations and challenges. And I thought it would be good to hear each other's stories. Today's guest is college professor Tanya Rondinone. She is a professor of psychology in Connecticut. Welcome, Tanya.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. Now, you and I go way back.
Yes, that's
I don't want to say how way back, but we met when we were teenagers, which to me is just mind boggling.
right.
But we went to university together. And I think we're a really good example of how appearances and reality might differ from each other when you first meet somebody. So, Tanya, if you could just share the story about how we first became acquainted with one another, because I find it very funny.
All right. So I met Susan, when we were in a bio class together. And in this particular bio class, it was a stadium style classroom. So we were way up and we were seated alphabetically. So we had no choice who we sat next to. And you were a seat and a half away from me. Because the seat in the middle, for some reason, between us, the person never showed up for class. And I would turn and try to talk to you, and you would always turn away from me. And you had this big bow in your hair, and you had your little sweater all tied up nice and tight. And I would come to class in sweatpants, just rolled out of bed. And I thought, wow, this woman's so snobby. She won't talk to me. And I found it fascinating when, I don't know, maybe months later, one of our mutual friends introduced us. She was like, "You're friends with her? She's so snobby." And come to find out, you were far from a snob.
And it's so funny because I thought you were like this Miss Popular because you were always talking to all the boys around us. And not that you're not popular, but I just thought, and especially we went to a Catholic university where a lot of the kids were wealthy.
Yes.
And I just thought, oh, she's just another one of those kids who mommy and daddy's paying for her own college ride. She probably gets these little care packages. And that so wasn't me. And it was just comical because once I got to know you, um, I would consider us both white sheeps of our family
Oh,
because we're really the only ones that got educated, right?
no, my sister did get educated, but she did so after she served in the military. So she went
Okay.
to the military first and then went and earned her nursing degree. But you're right, we were the rest of their families. That was not their life plan.
Yeah, to me that's interesting. Okay, so would you just tell us a little bit of background about like your family, just some different things. Like I said, you're a professor of psychology,
Right.
and even like what made you want to get into that? I mean, to me that's pretty powerful.
Well, as you know, I ended up in the educational field by default, really. So I'll just go back even further. When I was in college and you met me, I had psychology was not on my radar. Both of my parents were educators, and when I was a little kid, I said I want to be a teacher. And even when I was in high school, I said I want to be a teacher. Both of my parents were like, no, do not go into teaching. It's a horrible occupation. Stay away from it. So then I decided I want to be a lawyer. So I just when I went to university with you, I really thought I'm going to be a lawyer. So I started out with criminal justice and thought, well, that'll be really interesting. And the more I got into it, the more I realized, even though I can argue with anybody endlessly, I realized that it really wasn't my cup of tea. As much as I wanted to help people, once I started taking psychology courses, I was like, this is what I love. I really love trying to figure out the human mind. I know you and I differ a little bit on this, but I love the science behind it. I really enjoyed reading, which most people find dull and boring, the research articles. But at the same time, even recognizing back then that the research articles were so biased. The average person who was a subject was a white male in a college setting. And I always thought they were very biased against women, even, all the problems with children were because they had horrible mothers. Um, so I don't know. I just really, one of the things I discovered, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, people tended to come to me with their problems. So when we go back to you thought I was popular when you first met me, and you said I was very talkative, I learned very early on in my life it was better to start talking than to have people ask me questions. Because if I,
That's so interesting to me, T. And I'm sorry, I'm calling you T. That's
that's
just the nickname
okay.
I give Tanya. Is that I have noticed a direct correlation with people who get us into a psych background and people who I would refer to are highly intuitive. And I always feel like highly intuitive people naturally are of the way where people will almost energetically vomit on you, where they
Yeah.
tell you their life story.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sure that was something that you dealt with when you were young.
Yeah, and so I was so used to people coming to me, and so obviously, even though I was a talker when I met people, it was so they wouldn't ask me questions about myself. I was
Mm.
never comfortable talking about myself. I was very comfortable listening to everybody else, but one of the ramifications of that is you learn very quickly, unfortunately, that because people come to you, very rarely do people ask, "How are you?" But
Mhm.
that's also because I put up those defenses from living in a chaotic home that nobody really wanted to hear what I had to say. So I was always the listener. Uh,
Right. Okay, so let's take that a step further. When you say you're up in a chaotic home, just briefly talk about some of the challenges that you had with the way that you were brought up.
So you and I were both brought up in the generation that people didn't discuss family problems. It was considered taboo. You weren't allowed to talk about it. Even if a teacher recognized something and said, "Is everything okay?" You always knew to say, "Oh yes, everything's fine. Everything's fine." Um, and even though people knew your home life was not fine, I remember my mother taking me to a professional because I was having a lot of stomach problems. I was I always had stomach aches. I always had headaches. And she took me to a psychiatrist, and I lied to him. I said, "Oh no, everything's fine."
Mm.
And it was partly because I didn't trust him. I thought, "Is this man going to tell my mother everything I say in here?" So I grew up in a home where there was a lot of chaos. I grew up with a parent who was an alcoholic, has been recovered now for 25 years, thank goodness.
Mhm.
Um, but anybody who grows up with a parent who is emotionally absent because of any type of addiction, you learn to fend for yourself as a child. You learn that your emotional needs are not important. I became more comfortable being alone, even though I was in a house with six people. I would go to my room and I became very comfortable with books. Books were my you I know you feel the same way. I was an avid reader, and I remember that was one of the things we started connecting over was we both loved to read.
Right.
And it was just always an escape for me. So growing up in that type of home, I didn't trust people, hence why I was the talker
Mhm.
and the listener, but not allowing people to ask me questions. Um, I learned not to attach to people because people always let me down. So that does lead into relationship problems as you get older. It leads into setting up this. This is something about me that I'm not telling you that you already know. It's also setting up this perfection. I have to be perfect for everybody else. So it was chaotic growing up in a house like that. There were problems with my siblings as well, which I won't get into because I don't want to out them for some of their problems. Fortunately, most of us have worked through a lot of the stuff that we went through in childhood, and but it was difficult. And I, fortunately, because I was in the field, knew what to do. Not all the time, but knew what resources were out there.
Now, I have to ask you, growing up this way, and I mean, I think as we can look back, what do they say? Hindsight's 2020. I
Right.
think when we look back, you can say, I'm glad certain things happened to me because it taught me A, B, and C. So, having grown up like this, what are some positives that you kind of took away from that?
So obviously, if I could have my childhood over again, I would want a lot of things differently. But I remember years ago when I first got out of grad school, I was working in a group home, and majority of the children there were either neglected, abused, physically, sexually, emotionally, um, and I knew what it was like to be emotionally abused. And but one of the things that I found interesting was I was like, wow, the resiliency in these kids is amazing, and I need to be more resilient. But it also gave me some compassion and empathy for them. While I couldn't understand all of their situations, I understood what it felt like to be the person who was on the outside of a family. I understood what it felt like to be neglected. It gave me a sense of compassion that I don't think I would have had otherwise. Even when I got into the college setting, um, just working with students, it was funny because a lot of students would come to me with certain problems. I never understood why. I'm like, why are they coming to me and not this professor or that professor? And somebody finally said to me, because they understand that you're not going to judge them and that you get it, that you get what they're feeling. Um, and of course, as I've already stated, I keep to myself. I'm very
Mhm.
personal. I'm very private. So I wasn't one of those people who said, "Oh yeah," and then blurted out my life history to this student who came
Mhm.
to me. So I think it allowed me some insight into people I work with in the field. It gave me insight into myself as well because now I could say, okay, I can use this instead of using this as instead of this being this horrible barrier that I had to deal with, I reprogrammed it per se. I took it off this shelf and put it on this shelf. Said, I'm going to use this to help me. I'm going to use that pain. I'm going to use that understanding to help other people and maybe help them get through something where I didn't have that person to help me. So yeah, so it's positive in that way.
Yeah, and that's I mean, if you think about it, that's really why we're here, is to help other people. And I think time and time again, when I like doing readings for people, it's like you got to use what happened to you in a negative and kind of spin it. And you've
Absolutely.
definitely done that. Yeah, I can absolutely see that with you. And it's so funny too, because I was an English major and I started off as a business major. You started off as, criminal justice.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, and the fact that we both turned out to be teachers,
I know.
and I mean, I didn't realize you actually wanted to be a teacher before that.
But not once I got into college. So it was funny because once I left grad school, I worked at a group home for children, and then I actually became an Alzheimer's unit director and had my own consulting business. I had no desire to go into education. I went into education. I know this is going to sound horrible, a little bit by default. I was teaching part time because I like to do it. When my kids were smaller, I was just like, I need something besides Teletubbies. I could hear the neurons dying in my head. I went into education to keep my kids out of daycare, and I don't fault anybody who uses daycare. It's just I was working 70 hours a week. I'm like, this is crazy. And then I just found out I really enjoyed it, and I was also really fortunate that the first full time job I had in teaching, I worked in an all women's college where many of the people who worked there embraced me and really helped me shine and taught me so much about myself that I didn't know. Um, this is sound really bizarre. I didn't realize I was intelligent per se.
It doesn't sound bizarre at all. I'm amazed at how many people don't realize they're smart.
Yeah, I had, and it's so funny. Like when we've been around some of our college friends, and like, oh yeah, Tanya, you were smart. I'm like, what? And then I sometimes think, what if I just worked harder when I was in college? um, but no, I really had a great support system at the one college that I worked at, and they made me realize that I had something to offer. And once I realized that and embraced education, I haven't looked back. I thoroughly enjoy being in the classroom. One of the
Absolutely.
yeah, and one of the most
And
difficult things was. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, no, no. I'm just saying that's one thing that like our listeners should understand, is that just because you're on a track this way
Yes.
doesn't mean, like I got into teaching. I mean, I remember as an English major, I never intended to be a teacher. And
Right.
it's like, and I think you're the same way. You have natural leadership abilities. I mean, you were a vice president of your class
In high school,
in
yes.
high school. Yeah. So, I mean, you already had like those leadership type of
Yep.
capabilities. And I think that you just kind of slipped into it really well. When you started teaching, I don't think anybody was surprised.
I think I was the most surprised out of everybody. Yeah. Because I was like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? And it
Yeah.
was funny because I enjoyed being in the classroom. My first class, I mean, I was petrified, I was nervous. But at my first classroom, I was 24 years old.
Yeah.
And I really thoroughly enjoyed it. But again, it didn't become a full time job for me until my early 30s.
Right.
And I was so worried about going into teaching because I thought, when I'm in the clinical world, I see I'm helping people. And as an educator, you don't always see that, but you are. You're
Yeah.
changing lives, but you don't realize that at the time.
Yeah, a lot of times, it's years later, and I'm sure you've had students come back years later where they say something and you're just like, I don't even remember saying that. But
Yes.
they're like, they remember word for word. I know as a teacher, it used to kind of freak me out when the students they'd notice every single thing about you. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like what your shoes were, how you wore your hair a certain day. And I would think to myself, oh my gosh, how weighty is that? The responsibility of that somebody's listening and watching and paying attention to me that much.
They know what jewelry I wear.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Now, yes.
Yeah, but it doesn't surprise me that you became a teacher, and not to get too woo woo here, but I will. To me, it's like I've found that we gravitate from life to life to life with certain professions. And I mean, I know for myself, when I stood in front of a class for the first time and started teaching, it felt very natural. Would you say the same thing?
Yeah, I felt very comfortable with it. The biggest thing I had to learn to do in teaching was to talk less, listen more.
Yeah.
And so my first couple, I feel really badly for the students in my first couple of semesters because they probably walked away with a notebook this big. because I mean, you have to know everything.
Too funny.
Yeah, I'm
So
like,
now I have to ask you this, and I want to get into one of your sons in a second, but how did having a psychology background um, cause you to parent? I mean, I'm pretty sure you parented differently than your parents parented. But I mean, how did that kind of enhance your parenting skills when you did decide to actually get married and have children?
well, if you would ask my children, they would say it was torture having a psychologist as a mother. Because I had to talk about everything,
Oh, funny.
yeah. So, funny, I just had this conversation with my one of my sons the other day. I said, I'm not a developmentalist, but
Explain that.
I'm sorry, a developmentalist is a psychologist who teaches courses in human development. And I always taught adolescent development because I worked with adolescents. So I guess I shouldn't say I'm not a developmentalist, but I didn't really teach child development until I switched to another college. And I really wish in some ways I taught a lot of those courses while I was parenting because I'm a firm believer if I'm going to teach it, I better practice it.
Oh yeah.
So um, I think being in the field of psychology, one of the things I always thought was so important for parenting, and I teach it in my classes, is just what I said before: talk less, listen more. Meet your children where they are. And I tried so hard to do that. A toddler's a toddler. We
Mhm.
can't expect them to be more advanced than we would an adult in our home. Um, I really wanted my children to embrace every stage of their life, and I wanted my children to feel heard. I just thought it was so important for them to have a voice in their home. We often don't let children have a voice in the home.
Yeah.
Um, or if they
And
do,
clearly it doesn't sound like you felt like you had a voice in your own home.
oh, not at all. No,
Yeah.
no. I felt if my children were angry with me, they had a right to tell me they were angry with me respectfully.
Mhm.
Um, if I didn't like something they did, I should talk to them respectfully. I also believe it's important that one of the things I made sure I did as a parent was apologize to my children when I knew I was wrong.
Huge.
So if I yelled at them and it was out of proportion,
Mhm.
I would calm down, go into the room and say, what you did might have been wrong. However, my reaction was also wrong. And I'm
Wow,
sorry.
what a powerful thing to teach a kid because that way, and we all have dealt with those people in our lives who don't have the capabilities of apologizing.
Absolutely.
See your parent doing it?
I just thought, and it's so funny because when I tell parents I do that, they're like, you apologize to your child? I said, yes, because if it was anybody else, if I yelled at my colleague or if I yelled at you,
Mhm.
I should call you up later and say, I am so sorry. That
Mhm.
wasn't about you. That was about me.
Right.
So it was also teaching my children to take responsibility
That's perfect. Yeah.
and to have their voice. So that was one of the things where I think psychology really came into my home. And again, my children would say, "All right, mom, sometimes we make his voice too much." Um,
Especially because you had boys. Boys I know don't want to talk as much. Now it's interesting too because you had two boys, which
yes.
I do see quite a bit that are the antithesis of each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
You
they couldn't
know?
be more. They could not be more different. My oldest son was very involved in sports. Um, just always on the go, high energy, hated school, hated reading. My younger son loved the arts, loved reading, loved school, loved learn. I mean, everything about it. But I always say I got the best of both worlds because I love the arts, but I also love sports. So I was able to get the best of both worlds with my kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads us into your younger son.
Yes.
Now I know that, and I hope I'm saying this appropriately. You have a gay son, correct? Am I saying that right?
Um, well, it's really interesting. I'm glad you used that term because I don't see him as a gay son. He's my son. I don't refer to my older son as my heterosexual son.
Right.
And years ago, when my son was younger, he said, "I'm not your gay son." And I thought, you know what? He's right. He is not my gay son. He is my son who happens to like men. I
Right.
don't say when I don't introduce my older son, say this is my son who likes women, and this is my son.
It's so true.
He's my son. Yeah. Um,
And I
and
know, like, Andrew to me just seems so, and it's, you did such a, he's just such a well-rounded, great kid. You
thank
know,
you.
and I can say kid. How old is Andrew now?
He's going to be 26 and
Oh my God. Okay. So he's not a kid anymore, but of course they feel like kids to us.
yeah.
But what were some things, because like I said, you did a good job.
Thank
And
you.
I mean, he's a good kid. But what would you think were some of the biggest challenges? What would you share with maybe other parents? And when did you know? When did he know? How did it kind of come out?
It was interesting because I knew that you were going to ask me about challenges of raising a son who tells you he's gay. And I had to really think about that question because I couldn't come up with an answer. And so I talked to my son about it. I said, I can't come up with an answer for that. Help me. And he's like, well, that's your answer, you know. But the biggest thing is I was fortunate in the sense that I approached parenting in the way that when I gave birth, my child was going to show me who they are, not the other way around.
Oh, God, Tanya, that's so powerful.
So thank you.
That's
Uh,
intense.
I just think that's really important. I think so many parents have a child with an agenda. And my agenda was I can't wait to see who you are and what you are. And I hope I don't mess you up in the
Oh,
process. Um, so I remember when my son was around somewhere between ages like 4 and 5, I remember watching him one day and thinking, hmm, I wonder if my son is going to be gay or if he's gay because he would have been already, yeah. And I thought, all right, whatever, not my place to say
right,
that. That's his.
right.
And I remember when he was in elementary school saying, I'm pretty sure that someday my son's going to come to me and tell me he likes guys. But again, wasn't my place to make have that conversation, especially that young. I was also fortunate that I know people in the homosexual community. So I made an effort when I thought my son was gay to actually talk to men and say, I don't want to mess this up. What should I do? What shouldn't I do? I got the mother thing down. I want to make sure I get this thing down. So if I had advice to give, so I'll go back to your other question before I move on. So I kind of knew in elementary school, and he came out to me very early. He came out to me in 5th grade,
Wow.
and he came out to me by leaving a note. I had this rule in my house: if you weren't comfortable saying something, you could always leave a note. And on the note, you could say, I don't want to talk about it, or I do want to talk about it. And he wrote on the note he wanted to talk about it. Um, and I remember getting the note and having two thoughts. Oh, thank God he gave me time to process before we talked. Not because I needed to process that he was potentially gay. It was I didn't want to mess it up.
Right.
Um, and I wasn't surprised because this is sound really bizarre. I had a sense of relief, like, oh, I can finally have this conversation with my son, like
Oh,
to let him know I'm okay. You're my son. This is just who you like. I've always had a rule with my boys. I don't care who you love, as long as you respect the people, you're kind to the people, you're loving to the people, and you're honest, and vice versa. The other people have to be that way to them. So it was really more of now, how do I help him navigate? Because coming out in 5th grade,
did he want to tell other people at that point?
I think he was still trying to figure out if he was gay. I think he was just really struggling to figure it out. So I think he wanted to come up to me, yes, definitely, to say, um, I need to talk about this. And I asked him earlier, why did you feel comfortable coming out to me? Like what made it? And he said, because he had never heard me speak poorly about any other particular group of people, even people who were gay. He also said he knew that I had friends who were lesbian and gay men. So he knew that I didn't have a problem with people for their sexuality. So because of that, he felt very comfortable coming out to me, because he says, well, obviously, if she's around these people and they're her friends, she must not think any differently of them. So
Exactly.
I was
And it's interesting as parents, and I mean, it's like we're human. We just blurt things out. Sometimes we're not on 100% of the time, but you realize, much like I was saying before about being a teacher, you realize how important it is that you are aware of the words that are coming out of your mouth. Because what's the expression? Little pitchers have big ears.
yeah.
They hear. They'll remember stuff like that. Now, I want to also ask, how did your husband deal with this? Did you tell him? Did he
I
know?
I told him very early on. I said, I think our son is going to be gay, or is gay. I shouldn't say going to be, because you are. Um, his first response was, well, we can't make that decision. I'm like, no, he either is or he isn't. It's not going to be that he either is or isn't. I think he is. And I said, I'm telling you that because I think you need to prepare for your response the day he tells us.
Mhm.
And it has to be a response of love. And so I'm the one that told he's my ex-husband, but I told him that our son came out and he was supportive. I think he struggled in the way that men struggle sometimes with, not all men, I don't want to put everybody in a box, but I should say, where parents struggle of, now what do I do?
Mhm.
How do I treat him? I'm like, you treat him just like you treat everybody else. You treat him just like you treat your other son. He's not, and that's why I say he's not my gay son. He's my son. I'm not going to treat him any differently. And it's like one of those things. Again, going back to, I asked my son, what advice would you give parents? And he's like, well, the advice you already give, mom. Talk less, listen more. Um, I'm a firm believer. You meet people where they are. So I had to meet my son where he was as a fifth grader.
Mhm.
And I remember it broke my heart having to say to him, I'm not sure that everybody who was in fifth grade is going to be able to understand you liking boys. You may have to be careful who you tell right now. And it broke my heart to have to say that to my son because I never want anybody to deny who they are, ever.
Mhm.
Um, if I could do things over, if I could do things differently, the one thing I would have done is introduce him to gay culture. I didn't think to do that. And the reason why that's so important is because of the fact that when they're teenagers, they don't really get to have that gay experience like heterosexuals get to have their experience.
Mhm.
Um, they always feel marginalized, even if they're in a family that's fully accepting, but even more so if their family doesn't accept them or if they can't tell anybody. So he was fortunate that he was in a family that accepted him, but he still felt marginalized, even with some relatives.
So
And
when did he tell other kids? Because I remember you telling stories about how Thomas would be like in some place and Andrew would be out at the pool with all the girls.
yeah,
And I just thought that was adorable.
his older brother hadn't quite figured it out yet. I was also a firm believer, and I'm a firm believer in not telling somebody else's story.
Right.
So I left up to Andrew when he told people. Obviously, he gave me permission to tell his father, and um, but when it came to his peers, he slowly found a group of people that he trusted. I'm sure there's people that he thought he could trust, and come to find out he couldn't. He was really fortunate that he did find a very small group that embraced who he was because he's also very artistic.
Right.
Um, and he to this day, I am blessed that he had a middle school music teacher who embraced him and taught him how to embrace himself.
Mhm.
And that's where teaching can make a difference because I truly believe I remember being frightened for him going to middle school, not just because of that, but because of he just he hadn't found his place yet.
Right.
And
And I
this
mean, honestly, the generation that he's in
is
was
so much
so
better.
much luckier than our generation. Uh,
Yes.
I mean, I just think of like how my students were. I mean, I had students that would say the first day of class, let's say their name was Mary. They're like, I don't associate myself with Mary. I would like you to call me Mark. And the
Yeah.
kids were totally cool about it. They were all like, okay. And I'm like, wow, that would never have gone over well when we were kids in the 70s.
Yeah, and I think peers today are more. We still have a long way to go, but I think teenagers today are more comfortable speaking up and saying, "Hey, you can't call people that. You can't
Mhm.
do that. Like, leave them alone." Um, and they're more accepting of them being themselves. And I think, I mean, don't get me wrong. I know that bullying's still a problem, but I mean, we're also fortunate. I live in, as you said, I live in Connecticut. I live in the Northeast, where um, it was probably one of the better areas to raise a kid who was artsy and gay. And like I said, I still wish one of the things that we talked about months ago was he had to, when he couldn't really embrace the gay culture until he became an adult.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought to take you to a pride parade.
Mhm.
It just didn't cross my mind because I was so comfortable with him just being who he was. And I think that's something I should, if I, like I said, if I had to go back and do something, I would have taken him to a pride parade. I would have introduced him to his peers.
Right. So
And
that's something that you would suggest to other adults who are listening to this who have, kids.
absolutely. I mean, again, meet them where they are. If you say, "Hey, listen, I want to go to a pride parade with you," they might be like, "Oh my gosh, no way." Or they might not be comfortable going with mom to a pride parade. But then you say, "Hey, I have this other trusted adult who you are comfortable going with." How, or even taking them to art show or something like that, where it's somebody from the gay community or LGBT community who's actually working on something. Those are I think because I just knew that he knew some people who were gay, that that was enough. And again, I think we have to do more with that. um I
Yeah,
think
I just have to commend you because I just always thought, I'm like, boy, he's lucky. He's got a cool mom who's kind of knowing how to navigate this. And I
yeah,
never really knew if it was just, that's why I'm asking you, if it was the psych background or the fact of the background that you had with your own upbringing.
I think it was probably a mix of both, Susan, because of the fact that I never like to see anybody ostracized. We've had this conversation about gay rights, black rights, women's rights, and why all of those are very important. I always say, but why do we have to have those? Why aren't we just have human rights? Why does everybody have to have this? And I realize labeling helps promote things, so I don't want to take away from that. But I always find it frustrating that one of my biggest fears. When you say, I guess when go back to the challenges, the biggest challenge I had was to keep my fears to myself. My fear was, is my son going to be beaten up because of who he is? Is my son ever going to be able to get married? Is my son going to be rejected from a job? Is he going to be rejected from family members? Um, and those were all things that were my challenges of how do I keep those fears in me and not project them onto him, because
Right,
it's not fair to do that to him. Uh,
right.
and the other thing too is one of the things that I think, if I have to give advice, and you already mentioned it, Susan, advice to family is when you have a child and you don't have the blueprint in front of you when you get your kid. You don't know who they're going to be. So what you say in that household, there's so many children that learn to hate the homosexual community because they've heard these horrible words in their household. And then when they recognize that they are homosexual themselves, they've already learned to hurt themselves and hate themselves. And that's horrible. That by the time they recognize who they are, they've already learned to hate that identity. And
Wow.
I think that's what we have to, if I were to tell a parent, just think of your child as a flower, that mystery flower. You're not going to know what color it is until it comes out, you know? Um,
Now that's excellent advice, T. That really is. That's perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so I just want to switch gears a little bit. And I'm really glad that you candidly shared that. So I thank you for that.
yeah.
Um, as a college professor, and I know as a high school teacher, like I was for so many years, a lot of times, you have the kids come up from middle school and you'd be like, the middle school teachers didn't teach them. And then as the high school teachers, I know the college professors were like, the high school kids didn't teach you. So it's, as a college professor, what advice would you give to parents now to better prepare, equipped their young people for the college experience?
Leave them alone.
Ooh, okay. Do tell what you mean by that.
Um, we are so connected via our cell phones, instant messaging, everything. Um, to prepare your kid to go to school to college ahead of time, remind them that they are responsible for their education. That's key. One of the biggest problems we have with freshmen who come into college is they're so used to being told you have to do this. Did you hand in this? And we don't do that, as you know. When you get to college, here's your syllabus. I mean, I'm that professor who will give reminders. Don't forget your assignment's due on Thursday. Not everybody's going to do that because the assumption is I already handed you the assignment. It has a due date on it. I am not your secretary, so why should I tell you when things are due? Um, we get students who email us, "Hey, when's the assignment due?" I won't respond to those emails. And the reason why I won't respond to those emails is because I've already given you the syllabus and it's also online. And I'll tell the student in class, I'll say, "Hey, listen, I didn't respond to your email because I'm not your personal assistant. You know, you you have access to those due dates. And they're like, yeah, but I was out with my friends and I wasn't sure if I had something to do tomorrow. I'm like, yeah, but again. Um, and when they leave alone part, I can't tell you how many times I would sit down with academic advising, not as much where I teach now because I teach at a community college now, but at a 4-year college where I would start helping them select courses and they would say, hang on, let me check with my parent. I'm like, no, if you're going to check with your parent, then get out of my office because your parent's not advising you right now. I am. And it's not that I was like, I know better than everybody else, but let your child go into this world. Don't check on them every single day because what happens is one of the biggest problems with students today, they're not staying at school because what happens is they get to school, they're still so connected with their other life outside of home by still texting all their high school friends and all their family that they don't learn how to connect with this group here at college. So because they don't make this connection, they're more likely to go back home. And the best thing you can do is obviously check in on them because they want you to know they care, but don't make them check in with you every single night. If they call you up and say, hey, I'm not sure how to do this. Oh, have you talked to one of your professors? Just get them to troubleshoot, make them responsible for their learning. That's the best advice I could give to a parent.
Oh, that's brilliant, Tanya. Thank you. No, that's good. And like I said, it was always like a pecking order of it was their fault. It was their fault. It was their fault. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, we were the generation that we got dropped off and we had to just figure it out. We're like, well, where do we go register classes? Well, I guess we'll just follow these people.
Yeah. I both of us, I think, walked into the college experience. I mean, we were the first kids in the family to go to the college. So it
Very
wasn't like I could see what my brother did or my sister did. It was, we were
clueless. Absolutely. But the point is that we figured it out. We knew how do I need to ask somebody.
Mhm.
Many students just don't know who to ask anymore, and that's where the problem comes in. So and I work with a lot of first generation students just like we were, so they don't know where to ask, who to ask, and they feel full. Like at least we knew, like you and we would ask questions but we didn't feel like we were the only ones who didn't know the answers, whereas this generation feels like they're the only ones that doesn't know the answers. So that's a problem. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, Tanya, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. I truly appreciate your time and being very candid. That's lovely. I just want to say thank you for being here, everybody.
For
This,
having me.
what?
Oh, sorry, you said everybody. So
Absolutely. But this is, once again, International Psychic Medium, Susan Schueler, and you just watched MidLife Conversations. And I just want to thank you all for being here and remind you that we are all one. So until next time, bye-bye. Have a great week.